Ladies and gentlemen, I need you to take your seats now, please. We'll get there. Please take your seats. Our program is about to begin. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for your kind attention. Thank you so much. And I'm delighted to begin our program this evening with a word from Brookings Vice President for Foreign Policy, Dr. Bruce Jones.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Erev Tov. I'm delighted to see so many friends here tonight. For those of you who are with us for the first time, my name is Bruce Jones. I'm the Vice President at the Brookings Institution and the Director of the Foreign Policy Program. And welcome everyone for joining us for Saban Forum 2016. For 13 years and counting, based on the vision of Executive Vice President Martin Indyk, Brookings has been proud to partner with Cheryl and Chaim Saban to produce this unique dialogue. The forum gathers Israeli and American leaders from politics, the media, business, and civil society to discuss key issues in the relationship and the surrounding region. The title of the dialogue this year is Challenges Facing the Trump Administration in the Middle East, and I'm going to surprise everybody by telling you that this is indeed a time of uncertainty and surprises in modern politics. The Middle East, it barely needs to be stated, is facing turbulent and indeed violent times. As we meet tonight, a humanitarian crisis is unfolding that rivals any in recent decades in Aleppo and other parts of Syria. And it's not Syria alone. The crisis also grips Western Iraq, Yemen, Libya, and other parts of the region. The region and many countries abroad have been afflicted by the sensational butchery of Daesh and other terrorist organizations and suffers a crisis of governance as a whole. And we meet in a period of other forms of uncertainty. The geopolitical landscape is in flux, both in Asia and in Europe, and that creates both important risks and obstacles to progress. But it seems to me as we meet tonight that there are opportunities as well. There are new actors and new possibilities for reform in critical countries in the region, and the potential, at least, of new partnerships to tackle the threat of terrorism. The president-elect will have his hands full, but with an engaged policy, progress is possible on several fronts. So there are times when things look bleak, but despair is not a policy. We at Brookings and here at the Saban Forum are in the business of trying to devise better options to move things forward. The task before us this weekend is not just to understand the world better, but to understand how we might effectively impact its future. In that regard, I want to highlight that there are several members of the President-elect's transition team and his advisors participating in the forum this weekend. We greatly appreciate their presence and their engagement, and we offer them our best wishes during the transition, as well as any assistance that we at Brookings can offer. We also appreciate the participation and the engagement of the current administration, as well as several friends from Congress and the United Nations. Americans and Israelis, with their close and enduring partnership, should face the challenges of the Middle East together with an open, candid, and level-headed approach. That's an approach that has been the hallmark of the past 12 Saban Forums, and I'm sure that that high standard will define this 13th forum as well. This, for us, is a premier annual event of our work on the Middle East and on U.S.-Israeli relations. And it is made possible by masterful work by the scholars and the staff of our Center of Middle East Policy, who work around the year on critical issues in the region, from the Syrian civil war to the dynamics of the Gulf to elections in Tunisia and everything in between. We're going to be placing a growing focus of our work on stabilization in the region and the governance challenge that the region faces. Naturally, a particular focus of the work is on the close and special partnership between the United States and Israel. And the Saban Forum is the apex of our ongoing programming on U.S.-Israeli relations. It's made possible by the tireless work of our scholars and our center staff. I'd like to specifically thank Tamara Wittes and Natan Sachs, together with Martin Indyk, for their leadership, and Sadie Jonathan and Ann Peckham for their tireless efforts in pulling all this together. And I'd like to ask you to join me in thanking the staff for their huge work and effort to pull this together. I'm truly grateful that Brookings, in partnership with Cheryl and Haim Saban, can bring together this weekend's distinguished group. So, on behalf of myself and Martin Indyk and Tamara Wittes, thank you all for taking the time and the effort to be here. And now I'm delighted to hand over the proceedings to our friend and our partner, the chair of the Saban Forum, Mr. Haim Saban.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you all for joining us at the 13th Saban Forum. As always, it's a pleasure for me to partner with my friends at the Brookings Institution. And I especially want to thank Martin, Tamara, Bruce, Amitai, Moshe, Debbie, Aya, and everybody, Sadie, and everybody that worked really hard to put it all together. Well, you may have noticed that the Middle East is in a total state of disarray. And there is no one better suited to speak to us tonight about the dizzying array of security threats that Israel faces daily and long-term, near and far, than Minister of Defense Avigdor Lieberman was appointed Minister of Defense earlier this year. He is no stranger to Washington or other world capitals, having previously served as Israel Minister of Foreign Affairs. He's a veteran member of Israel's Inner Security Cabinet, dealing with the threats to Israel and directing the country's diplomatic and military responses to these threats. I'm happy to say that Minister Lieberman is also a veteran of the Saban Forum as well. Tonight, Minister Lieberman will be in conversation with Jake Tapper, the Chief Washington correspondent for CNN, and the anchor of the programs The Lead with Jake Tapper and State of the Union. He's also an accomplished cartoonist. We might make some deal together on cartoons. And a very widely published author. Ladies and gentlemen, Defense Minister Avigdor Lieberman and Jake Tapper.
It's so nice to be here. Thanks. I know so many people in this room. I can't acknowledge everybody. From Senator Coons and Senator Markey and Susan Blumenthal to my dear friends Jeff and Pamela, to the ambassador. I would be remiss if I did not point out that Congressman Ted Deutsch was my junior counselor at Camp Vermont in the Poconos. So he knows where the bodies are buried, so to speak, or literally. It's an honor to be here. Martin, thank you so much for the invitation. Chaim, thank you so much. Minister Lieberman, thank you so much. I assume you saw your brother, Senator Lieberman, out there as well. I'll just start with the questions, and we'll see what he answers.
First of all, I see you have too many questions.
I do have many questions. Let me just start off with the fact that President-elect Trump has named the man he wants to play your role, except in the United States, retired Marine General James Mattis. Do you know him? What do you think of him?
I didn't met him, and we don't have any real previous talks, but of course I know who's a general, and he was the commander of CENTCOM, and we know in Israel a lot about him, about his stance, and what we see in the press. It's, from my point of view, it's very positive.
Okay. Obviously, there are many things that the president-elect has said having to do with the state of Israel. One of the things he has said is, I believe he said on day one, he would want to move the capital to Jerusalem. Obviously, that is, I think it's fair to say, easier said than done. Do you think that he should do that on day one?
First of all, I think that we see before in every elections the same promise to remove the embassy to Jerusalem. But I think that we will wait and we will see. And a year ago I was here, it was much easier. I was in opposition. Now as a minister I try to be politically correct. It's very difficult for me. And we will wait and we will see, but I think it was something publicly and strong public commitment, and we will wait.
I won't do too many follow-ups on this one, but just as a matter of whether or not the move itself would be perceived as incendiary and provocative, is it something that you think should happen, if it happens, immediately, or is it something that you think should maybe be done with a little bit more deliberation?
What it's really crucial for us to agree with new administration regarding all our common policy. Not only one point like American embassy. It's very important, but we have many other issues. It's Iran and Palestinian issue and settlements and Syria. We have enough challenges all around Israel. And I think that it will be mistake, to take the embassy as a focal point. I think that it's crucial to move forward with all agenda, and we have many items on our common agenda. And I think that maybe the embassy will be one of the points.
Let's talk about the other items that you listed, starting with the Iran deal. We're getting somewhat mixed messages about whether or not President-elect, when he becomes President Trump, will literally rip up the Iran deal, or whether there will be recalibrations. One senator suggested to me that all they need to do, all the new administration would need to do, is enforce the Iran deal, which would set new sanctions into place, since international monitors have said there have been violations. What would Israel like to see happen when it comes to the Iran deal?
First of all, I will speak only about my personal position, and it's not a secret. My position was very, very clear against deal with Iran, but it really doesn't matter. What is the real question? It's to understand what happened since 5+1 signed a deal with Iranians. And what we saw the ballistic missiles in the center of Tehran with inscription in Hebrew to wipe off the state of Israel. We saw competition in Tehran for the best cartoon to deny the fact of Holocaust. We saw the last report of State Department, annual report regarding the terror in the world, and Iranians, according to this report, the biggest sponsor of terror all around the world. And we see Iranian penetration to Yemen, to Lebanon, to Syria, their activity in Iraq, and they are trying to undermine the stability in all the Middle East. And I think it's very important to understand what happens with Iran after the deal. And my conclusion, it's also very, very clear, but it's my conclusion, and I think that negotiations, talks with the United States about our common position regarding Iran, it's only during the first meeting between Prime Minister and President-elect, we will see, and at least my position will be very clear. I think it's crucial to move forward with more sanctions because it was clear violation of agreement, especially in the area missiles like not nuclear but ballistic missiles. The next step will be nuclear missiles, but at least up until now it's only ballistic missiles, and of course the violation of human rights and their activity in Syria. They responsible like Assad for the massacre 500,000 people and the atrocities that we see every day. I think it's necessary to continue with sanctions and to be very, very tough on all issues.
So just to clarify, if I'm understanding you correctly, and tell me if I'm wrong, please, you believe, and you're not the only one, that Iran has violated the deal. So you just think that the United States just needs to go into the UN Security Council and get the trigger to enforce more sanctions on Iran because they have already violated the deal, not that the deal should just be torn up. Is that a fair characterization?
Look, what happens in the world today, it's very, very problematic picture because not only Iranians, all crazy guys, all radical guys, they understand that there is no payment for violation of commitments, of violation of all acceptable norms. Forget for a moment from Middle East. Look what happens with North Korea. One crazy guy took his own population as a hostages, clear violation of all resolutions, Security Council commitments, negotiations between 5 plus North Korea, United States, North Korea, nuclear bombs, missiles, etc., etc. And I don't see any ability or any readiness or political will to stop this crazy guy. And the same with Iranians. They must pay for every violation of their commitments. And what happens at least with ballistic missiles, it's clear violation of their commitments according to the agreements that they signed.
Let's turn to Syria. Right now you referred to Bashar al-Assad and the massacre he's been committing against his own people. We just learned, I think from a Syrian human rights group today, that 600 more were killed in Aleppo. And I'm wondering what you think the role of the United States in the Trump administration should be when it comes to Syria, because my impression is that President-elect Trump would like to basically wash his hands of Syria and let Putin and Assad do whatever they think is necessary and just have the United States focus on ISIS. Is that a position that you think would be the right one? Is that a position you think would be good for the state of Israel?
Again, it's not only Israel.
It's the region.
We should know that today we are living in the real small global village, and everything is as connected vessels. And it's much better to see all the picture. And the picture in the Middle East, in the broad Middle East, that we have every day at least 500 people slaughtered, killed, hundreds of people injured, and we don't see again any readiness to stop this bloodshed. If I take all the Middle East from South Sudan until Iraq, Libya, South Sudan, Libya, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, you have every day at least 500 people killed and slaughtered. And what's the response from international community? And to speak only about ISIS, not ISIS, all of them the same. Muslim Brotherhoods and Al-Qaeda and ISIS, at the end of the day, it's the same. And I think that our challenge to stop these radical people, it doesn't matter what's their name, but this violence, this bloodshed, it's something in 21st century. I think it's clear that it's completely unacceptable for all normal people. I don't see any differences between Hamas, Hezbollah, or Islamic State, and only to speak about the Daesh, it's not right. What's the differences between Hezbollah, Hamas, and Islamic State? It's the same.
Would you put Assad in that group?
Assad, it's if, today like an advisor, what is crucial for any deal in Syria, from my point of view. I'm not sure that it's possible, but two preconditions: Assad out of Syria and Iranians out of Syria. It's impossible to accept the fact that the guy who is responsible for killing of 500,000 people, 8 million people displaced, and first time maybe since the First World War, the head of state that used chemical weapons against his own people, and he will continue to be acceptable player in international arena. And the same Iranians, I think their penetration and their efforts to undermine the stability of every country, of all this region, we must put Assad in his place, and the Iranians in his place.
And who leads that effort?
No doubt, from our point of view, United States, it's biggest power in the world, and it's their responsibility. The time for splendid isolation, it was maybe 100 years ago, more than a century, but today it's united world. It's impossible to speak about isolation. I think it's clear, and especially President-elect, he speaks about the military power and strong army and powerful United States, and I think the biggest challenge, even here in United States, it's Daesh, ISIS also. We saw ISIS that they are trying every day to issue some terrorist act to recruit more supporters here in the United States. And Daesh and all radical Islamic operatives, they are coming from Middle East. If you really want to confront this phenomenon, you must start from the Middle East.
I know you're a minister now, so you have to be more diplomatic, but you do recognize that the president-elect has talked about withdrawing more from the Middle East than even whatever status you think the United States has there right now.
You know, I don't know if he spoke withdrawing from Saudi Arabia or from the Gulf, but we hope that regarding Syria, he will be active and regarding the solutions. And to speak frankly, it's impossible to achieve any solution without American active participation in this process. We need strong America. We need America active in, at least in our region. And I hope that we will really achieve some, you know, we will agree about the common vision regarding future of the Middle East.
Let's talk about the Israeli-Palestinian peace process going forward. President.
Not peace and not process.
The future Palestinian, Israeli-Palestinian peace process.
Okay.
President-elect Trump has said that perhaps Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, can be put in charge of that peace process. Have you met Jared Kushner?
No.
What do you think of the idea of Jared Kushner being put in charge of the peace process?
What we know, he really smart, tough guy, and I hope that he will bring a new energy to our region. But maybe you forgot, day before yesterday, the Fatah convention in Ramallah, the Mahmoud Abbas gave last his public speech. And what he said, it was very clear. He will never give up the idea of refugees. And of course, he will never recognize the right of Israel as to exist as a Jewish state. With those two preconditions, you know, we really don't have nothing to discuss with the Palestinians. The right of return for the Palestinian refugees, it's end of the Zionist idea of the Zionist state, and fact that he insisted that he will never recognize Israel as a Jewish nation state. What exactly will be the issue to discuss? I think it's clear that the same. He doesn't have any authority represent Palestinian people. You know, the elections, the presidential elections in Palestinian Authority were supposed to be held in January 2010. He doesn't have any control on Gaza Strip, and even the municipal elections, the last October, he postponed for many years, I understand. And I think, you know, to achieve real strategic breakthrough, to achieve comprehensive, reasonable solution between us and Palestinians, we need somebody very strong that has support from his own people, very popular, and somebody who is a real leader and ready, you know, to sacrifice something for peace. And I don't see Mahmoud Abbas that he's a real partner to achieve final status agreement. And to speak frankly, what we need today is interim agreement for some years to rebuild a trust between two sides and to wait for real opportunity. You know, Israel proved, we proved our desire to achieve real peace many times. We signed peace agreement with Egypt, and we gave up Sinai territory 6 times more than all Israel today. we signed a peace agreement with Jordan. We withdrew from Gaza Strip until the very last inch according to the 67 line. We gave up half of Judea and Samaria to Palestinians, and we evacuated 21 flourishing settlements from Gaza Strip and transferred 10,000 Jews. And I think that we proved our desire to achieve a real, peaceful and reasonable solution. But for this kind of solution, you need, as I mentioned, a real strong partner, and I don't see today on Palestinian side this kind of leaders.
One of the things that's interesting about any potential peace process, obviously, other Arab states would likely have to be involved. And many of these Arab states don't even acknowledge, let alone your right to exist, they don't even acknowledge that they've ever had conversations with people like you. Have you ever talked with any members of the Saudi royal family about a peace process?
I don't remember, but we have many contacts with our neighbors in the region.
Very clear question. This is normally when I would be very aggressive, but it's a different setting here, so not to mention Shabbos. So on the subject of the peace process, this gets into the weeds a little bit, but I believe it's on Monday, the Knesset is going to have its first vote on whether or not some settlements are going to be made legal. You have proposed, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, a sort of freeze that would give any sort of peace process an opportunity to move forward. Is that, am I describing that inaccurately?
No.
How would you describe it?
My proposal is to wait for the new administration and to create, together with new administration, a common policy. Not, without any surprise, and not to create some facts, but to wait and to discuss with the next administration our policy and our visions. And I think it makes sense because, the reasons that we freeze and de facto, our construction activity in Judea and Samaria, in Jerusalem, it's really, I'm personally not satisfied. And the main reason it's not because we really don't want to build new homes in Judea and Samaria or in Jerusalem, because we had disagreements with American administration, and I think it's clear for us, for me at least, that key to the future of the settlements, it's understandings with United States, not only our desire. We're not in a vacuum. And I think the last 8 years, it was a huge problem. It was one of the main points of disagreements between us and the current administration.
The current administration, the outgoing administration, would often feel as though there would be settlements announced at inopportune times, right before Vice President Biden were to arrive in Israel, that sort of thing, that it was almost done in their face. Is that an unfair characterization by the Obama administration?
I think that there are many prejudiced views regarding the settlements, and I would like to underline that the settlements, they are not obstacle to peace. As I mentioned, we signed 2 peace agreements despite the settlements. And even when Israel evacuated, after our withdrawing from Gaza Strip, 21 settlements, the response from the Palestinian side was missiles on southern Israel and even on Tel Aviv. And I think it's really very biased approach, and to say that the settlements their problem, it's really wrong approach. And again, all settlements together, they less than 1.5% of all territory of Judea and Samaria. If I take total, all settlements together, includes towns like Malay, Dumim, in Ariel, it's less than 1.5% of all territory of Judea and Samaria. And maybe another point, I remember the Annapolis meeting between Tzipi Livni, I think in Tzipi here, and Ehud Olmert, Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, and Condi Rice in Annapolis. And it's impossible to offer more than Ehud Olmert offered in Annapolis. When I saw in our press the proposals, I was shocked. And we will never have any other prime minister that will offer more. And everything was ready for huge ceremony in the White House. At the last moment, Mahmoud Abbas refused to sign an agreement. It's also the fact. And Olmert was ready to evacuate all settlements and to open the issue of a law of return and swaps and everything. And it's another maybe illustration what the real problem of solution between us and Palestinians.
Just to put a period on this topic, do you think the vote on Monday to legalize some of these settlements should be postponed until after the United States and Israel
I
get together and are on the same page?
I clarified my position in cabinet, publicly, in press, and I think it's much better to postpone all this legislation and steps until 22 of January.
Anti-Semitism reared its head quite a bit during the presidential election in a way that I think probably a lot of Americans under a certain age had not seen perhaps ever in their lifetimes. How much notice did that get in Israel? The rise of the so-called alt-right, a lot of whom are anti-Semites, white supremacists, etc. A lot, and almost who unanimously supported the president-elect, which is not to say that his supporters are that way, but certainly a minority were. Did that get attention in Israel? Did you hear about this? Did you have any concerns?
We have concerns regarding all kinds of anti-Semitism. It doesn't matter if it comes from the left, from the right, or from the radical Islamic groups, because what we saw, especially on European soil, it's not only slogans, it's not only accusations. We saw the attacks on the Jewish school in Toulouse, with on Jewish museum in Brussels, on Hyper Kasher supermarket in Paris, and with victims, with bloodshed, and anti-Semitism is still very strong. It's not part of our history. It's part of every day of our existence. And we see as hypocrisy, especially in international community. If I take, for example, the last resolution of UNESCO, that it's maybe world record in the hypocrisy, that the Jewish people, they don't have any links to the Western Wall. It's something really crazy, and it's clear anti-Semitism, nothing new. And another issue, if we mentioned UNESCO, one of the problem of international community, that an international institute, that they more and more irrelevant, incapable to resolve any problem. Middle East, North Korea, Africa, Boko Haram, nothing. I didn't remember any example of some successful solution that comes as initiative of a Security Council, for example. Or another very respectable, not from my point of view, institution like Human Rights Council in Geneva, 70% of all resolutions against Israel, not against Iran, not against Zimbabwe, not against North Korea, but against Israel, 70% of all resolutions. And I think it's a weakness of all the international community of the Western world. We speak a lot about the human values and democratic values, but when it comes to the profits, everybody prefers his profits, not values. It's maybe the biggest problem.
There's a race going on right now for head of the Democratic National Committee. Congressman Keith Ellison, a Democrat from Minnesota, is running for that position. The Anti-Defamation League recently issued a statement saying that comments that Congressman Ellison made about Israel and about a population of, I'm paraphrasing here, but a small population controlling policy in that region compared to a much larger Arab population didn't make much sense. Again, it's a sloppy paraphrase, but it was enough for the Anti-Defamation League to say that the comments were disqualifying. Are you aware of this? Do you have any take on it?
No, I'm not aware, but if it's true, I think it's really unnecessary statements, and especially with the United States and our expectations from our biggest friend, the United States, you know, for really friendly atmosphere in our bilateral relations and discussions on all levels, include, of course, Senate, Congress, Israeli Knesset, and I hope that it, you know, some kind of a mistake.
Lastly, what do you think is the most serious problem, the most serious threat facing the state of Israel, the one that should be on the top of the agenda? Is it Iran, without question?
No question, it's Iran, because it's not only Iran, it's Iran through their proxies. You should know that annual budget from Iran to Hezbollah, it's about $900 million the last year, and the same without their financial support, Hamas, Jihad Islami, Hezbollah, without their technology, without their political support, all those they will not able to exist. And Iranians very active against Israel and the Jewish institutes, Jewish people, not only in the Middle East, but in Africa and in South America. We see what happens even in the last months regarding Iranian participation and involvement in Buenos Aires against our embassy in the Jewish Community Center, and we have every day, you know, we are handling every day with their provocations and their aggressions against Israel and Jewish people.
One last question I want to ask before I let you go, and that has to do with the relationship between the American Jewish community and the Israeli community. למדתי באוניברסיטת תל אביב. I studied at University of Tel Aviv. That's about all I remember. And I had a roommate named Baruch, like you. He was a Soviet immigrant, and he was a tough guy. He fought with Golani, and his attitude towards me, I thought, kind of like summed up some of the tensions between the American Jewish community and the Israeli Jewish community, which was he thought that all of us exchange students from the United States were soft, and he wasn't wrong. But he also thought that we should just shut up about our opinions about Israeli policy the United States can give money or don't give money, but you're not living here, so be quiet. And there does seem to be a point in American and Israeli relations right now, American Jewish and Israeli relations, about whether or not the American Jewish community, especially younger American Jews, are concerned about the direction of the Israeli politicians, whether the country is lurching too much to the right in American, in English parlance. And I'm wondering what you make of it, what you think of it. Is your attitude like Baruch? Or does there need to be a greater effort of understanding between especially younger American Jews and Israelis?
First of all, the State of Israel was established as a state for all Jewish people all around the world. And from my point of view, of course, we're really responsible not only for our citizens, but for our diaspora also. And I think that we failed with, especially with Jewish and Zionist education in United States and in Russia and in France and all around the world, because the problem, it's not right, left. The problem that only 5% of Jewish kids in the United States, they really have Jewish and Zionist education. Exclude Orthodox communities that they have Jewish but not Zionist education. It's the biggest problem. I think today it's our turn to allocate money for the Jewish education, Jewish Zionist education, first of all in the United States, because what we have, people really more and more disconnected to the Jewish values. They don't know Jewish history, and it's a huge problem. But it's not their problem; it's our problem. We failed, and I completely agree that dialogue, especially with the young Jewish generation, it's crucial. It's not important. It's crucial for our future. And at least me and my friends, we try to discuss with all Jewish communities around the world, and they must be part of this discussion of the future of the Jewish nation.
And we're going to open the floor to questions, is that right? Is there a microphone? I think I recognize you, Mr. Saban.
Chaim, אני לא מבין למה יש לך פרוטקציה.
I already asked your question. I don't know what you're...
I can shout. Should I shout? No, wait.
Yeah.
The organizers of this event.
Here it comes.
To clarify something about Keith Ellison and him running for head of the DNC, because that point wasn't clarified. Simply the defense minister was not aware of all the intricacies and the details, but I think that it's important for this audience to know. First, the fact that Keith Ellison is a Muslim is a non-issue at all. That is not an issue. With that out of the way, if you listen to Keith Ellison today and you see his statements, he's more of a Zionist than Herzl, Ben-Gurion, and Begin combined. I mean, really, it's amazing. It's a beautiful thing. If you go back to his positions, his papers, his speeches, the way he has voted, he is clearly an anti-Semite, an anti-Israel individual. Words matter and actions matter more. Keith Ellison would be a disaster for the relationship between the Jewish community and the Democratic Party. Now I've said what I had to say.
That wasn't really a question, but
I agree with
but
his
it is the Saban Forum, so. Can we have another question? Am I supposed to call on them, or are you just going to? Okay, we'll call on that gentleman right there. I believe I recognize him.
Mr. Minister, you mentioned that you see Iran being the biggest problem in the region, and obviously not just towards Israel, but actually towards the rest of most of the Sunni Arab world as well. You also have maintained, I think, over the years, a relationship with Vladimir Putin, and yet if today you look at the Russian position towards Iran, really no one else is doing as much to abet Iranian power, certainly in Syria, and I would say that has implications for the region. Given your long-standing relationship with Putin, do you see any potential to separate Putin from the Iranians? And if so, how would you go about doing that?
Well, look, we have many issues and many items with Russians, and we have many disagreements. We have many contacts with China, and we have many disagreements with China. I don't think it's the right approach to disregard Russia or China. We, at the end of the day, we're a small country. We have the same, our priorities, our relations. And of course, Putin, he's still not a Zionist guy. He thinks about Russia and the Russian interests. But the fact that we have a clear dialogue, we have some coordination, including Syria, I think it's very helpful. What can be, it's only dialogue between United States and Russia. Putin looks not for some deal with Israel. He looks with deal with United States regarding the sanctions in Ukraine and Syria and many other issues. It's two world powers that they have interests all around the world. I don't have any illusions. With all due respect to Israel and to myself, we understand that we're not able to resolve all problems of Russia, not in the world and not even in the Middle East. And the final agreement or final solution, it's possible to achieve only between Russia and United States, include their stance on Iran, on Syria, and many other issues.
We have a question here.
Martin Indyk, Minister Lieberman, thank you very much for joining us again this evening. One new development that I'm sure you're well aware of is the way in which Israel's strategic interests these days tend to coincide with those of your Arab neighbours, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates in particular. And I wonder, given your exposure to that in your position as Defence Minister, whether you think that they can play a useful role when it comes to trying to help you resolve the conflict, your conflict with the Palestinians. They call themselves the Arab Quartet, recently intervened in an effort to try to promote a succession process amongst the Palestinians, which is something that you've been talking about tonight. So I just wonder, what role do you see them playing, if any, in trying to help you resolve that conflict?
Thank you. As me, that the Arab world really regarding Palestinian issue, they only pay the lip service. It's really not their concern and not in their priorities. Because if Arab world, huge territory, 100 millions people. If they really ready to resolve Palestinian issue, it's something that it's possible for many, many years. And again, it's, what happened between 48 and 67. During 19 years, Arab world controlled all territory of Judea, Samaria under Jordanian sovereignty and Gaza Strip under Egyptian sovereignty. I didn't remember that somebody tried to resolve Palestinian issue during 19 years. Today we speak about 67 line, etc., etc. But problem, it's not history. Problem's the reality of today. And to resolve Palestinian issue, from my point of view, it's possible only as a part of large or reasonable regional comprehensive solution. When the Palestinian issue only one point, because today it's clear for the Arab world that the biggest threat for them, it's not Zionism, it's not Israel, it's not Jews, but it's Iranians and Daesh and Hezbollah and Hamas and the others. I think that they understand, but still they don't have political will, they don't have enough power to move forward with this approach. And from my point of view, it doesn't make sense to sign an agreement with Palestinians without agreement with all moderate Arab world. It must be something simultaneously, one final status agreement with all Arab world, not only with Palestinians. We're not able to impose on Palestinians some kind of solution, and bilateral efforts, I don't think that they bring some better future. And even United States, what we saw also, you don't have enough power and ability to impose on Palestinians. But if all moderate Arab world, if all of them come together, Egypt and Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Gulf countries, they're able to bring them to the table and to impose on them the solution. But the problem is that there is a huge gap, the disparity between understanding among the leadership and what happens among the people, among the crowds. And it's clear that it's a timing even for the Arab world, for their leadership, to start with, with public opinion, to explain their positions, to move forward, not only in the closed meetings, not only in Washington, but in the Arab world, in Arabic, to explain what the real threats and what the real opportunities. Because cooperation between us and the moderate Arab world, it's really a huge, huge strategic breakthrough for entire world. Together, I believe that we're able to resolve all problems with all problems in the Middle East, with terror, even with Iranians. The combination of our high tech, our ICT, our technology, and their financial capabilities, it's something new. But my position, it's enough with closed talks. It's a timing, it's opportunity for open talks, not only in the classrooms, and I would like to see our embassy in Qatar, in Abu Dhabi, in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, and their embassies in Tel Aviv, and direct flights. And for me, it's a real peace, not only an agreement. The problem between Israel and the Arab world, when we talk with them, it's all Israel, a state of Israel, and from their part, it's only the leadership. It's not with the state, not with the people, it's only with their leadership, and it's not enough.
I see a woman back there. If we could get the microphone to her.
Thank you so much. This is Heba Al-Qudsi Hilal, Washington Bureau Chief of Sharq Al-Awsat newspaper. I would like to ask about...
Could you talk a little bit louder? I'm sorry.
Sure. I would like to ask about the Arab Initiative for Peace that was submitted by Saudi Arabia in 2002. Is it a good time to revisit this initiative? I would like also to ask about the relation with Egypt. Is there any cooperation between Israel and Egypt regarding fighting all Islamic groups and terrorists in Sinai? And last question regarding two islands that there was some discussion between Saudi Arabia and Egypt regarding Sanafir and Tiran and Sanafir Island. Can you elaborate a little bit about this discussion, because it was not only between Egypt and Saudi Arabia, but US and Israel was involved in this discussion. What's the logistics about these two islands? Is it secured, or what's the
Thank you. I understand.
Thank you.
I will start with the first issue, Saudi Arabia initiative. There are some points that they're very positive, and we can discuss, and it's possible to take them for the negotiations. There are some other points like right of return that's completely impossible. But when we talk, we will come without any restrictions, without any preconditions. And my expectations, if we will start negotiations, that the other side also, they will come without preconditions. Regarding our relations with Egypt, we have normal relations. We have embassy in Cairo, they have embassy in Tel Aviv, and we have talks, contacts, and I think it's normal relations as between two normal states. Regarding their relations with Saudi Arabia, it's not our business. Of course, we are monitoring everything what happens in our region, but it's bilateral talks, bilateral deal between Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and I don't think that our opinion or our public statements will be so necessary in, regarding this issue.
I think I speak for everyone when I say, I'm sorry, that's all the time we have. I think I speak for everyone when I say thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
It's amazing how that works. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed your meal. And I'm delighted, thank you. And I'm delighted to welcome to the stage Martin Indyk.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Chaverim, I'm delighted to have the opportunity to join Bruce Jones and Chaim Saban in welcoming you all to this, the 13th Saban Forum. It's also my special privilege and honor to introduce you to a very special guest, our keynote speaker this evening, His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of the Arab Republic of Egypt, Sameh Shoukry. Foreign Minister Shoukry is very well known here in Washington, as is his wife, and we're very glad to have her join him this evening. He is one of the architects of the current US-Egyptian relationship, having served as ambassador to the United States between 2008 and 2012. In those dramatic years, his steady hand, his wise judgment, and his diplomatic skills helped navigate the relationship through stormy seas, safeguarding and preserving the partnership between the United States and Egypt. He left Washington with the admiration and friendship of many people, including myself. During his long and distinguished career, Sameh served as the permanent representative of Egypt to the United Nations in Geneva, as well as in London, Buenos Aires, New York, Vienna, and in many central roles in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Cairo. He is the very model of an Egyptian diplomat. In 2014, President Sisi called Minister Shoukry out of retirement back to serve his country as foreign minister. And in that role, as the representative of the largest, most powerful Arab country, he is one of the key players in shaping the Middle East today, a task we need not envy. As part of this mission, he has been instrumental in the all-important relationship between Egypt and its neighbor Israel, which he visited just this summer, and again represented Egypt at the funeral of the late President Shimon Peres. This relationship between Egypt and Israel is critical for the peace and welfare of the two countries, but it is also central to the prospects of broader peace and cooperation in the region. Cairo was and remains a key to regional stability and peace. Anwar Sadat was the first Arab leader to make an official visit to Israel, as we all remember, to address the Knesset in Jerusalem. Egypt was the first Arab country to make peace with Israel. It was the first Arab capital to host an Israeli embassy. And with President Sisi's leadership and involvement, Israeli-Palestinian peace may again become possible. In this regard, the relations between Israel and Egypt naturally depend upon a third partner, the United States. It is no accident that Egyptian-Israeli peace was cemented in a trilateral handshake between President Sadat, Prime Minister Menachem Begin, and President Jimmy Carter. Today, too, the strategic triangle between the United States, Egypt, and Israel can serve as the cornerstone for a better, more stable, and peaceful Middle East. Having had the opportunity to converse with President Sisi, together with the minister recently, I know that this is the Egyptian president's vision. We're truly honored and delighted that Foreign Minister Shoukry accepted our invitation to address the Saban Forum tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of the Arab Republic of Egypt, Mr. Sameh Shoukry.
Thank you, Martin, for that introduction. I'm honored and delighted to be with you tonight at this important forum, and I'm definitely glad to be back in Washington and to see so many friendly faces. Ladies and gentlemen, it is indeed my pleasure to be back in Washington today and to share with you Egypt's perspective on the key questions and the guiding principles that govern Egypt's foreign policy towards our troubled region, and to explore with you how Egypt and the United States can join forces to navigate such a turbulent regional environment in such troubled times. 5 years ago, the dynamics that governed the Middle East for at least 6 decades were profoundly changed, perhaps even irreversibly altered. A wave of large-scale societal change swept the region and shook it to its very core, launching a unique historic moment that is at once promising and alarming. How to navigate these turbulent waters is the core policy question of our time, and is indeed what will determine eventually, to quote Dickens, whether we are on the eve of a spring of hope or a winter of despair. Such navigation is quite inconceivable without some form of a guiding principle, a framework for making sense of the epoch we are in, and a guide for policy therein. The crux of the debate over the significance of the historic moment we are witnessing, as well as over how to navigate it, revolves around two contradictory positions. The first focuses exclusively on the opportunities for long-awaited change. Its proponents argue that it is time for change, the structures of power and governance in the Arab world. This is what the people want, and this is what they should get, at any cost. This is probably the thinking that has informed and continues to guide strategies of several regional and international actors that sought to support change without necessarily being too fussy about their allies. And this is how several extremists and a handful of UN-designated terrorist organizations, including ISIS and Al-Qaeda, found financial and military support in Syria, Iraq, and Libya, to mention but a few examples. On the other end of the political spectrum is another, diametrically opposed, position that sought, in the face of a wave of messy social change, to reverse the clock. Dysfunctional governments that failed to address their people's aspirations were, on balance, preferable to sectarian warlords and militia leaders or the terrorist threat. All that was needed, therefore, was to restore the old regimes and do business as usual, however decadent and dysfunctional that may be. If the price of the restoration of the old ways of governing is to quash every legitimate demand for change and crush popular hopes thereof, then so be it. We are also quite familiar with the diabolical consequences of this strategy, as well as its inherent futility. In vain in any attempt to stop the legitimate calls for change and the march of progress. The question remains, however, how to reap the benefits of this tidal wave of change whilst minimizing the price thereof. This is the core dilemma of foreign policy planning and the execution in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, our approach in Egypt to this dilemma is pretty straightforward, and our opening hypothesis is twofold. First, that orderly change is the much-needed prerequisite to breaking through the historical impasse that the region has reached, and to fulfilling the aspirations of millions of young people in the Middle East, a region in which more than 60% of the population are under the age of 30. Second, that compromising the integrity and stability of the institutions of nation-states in the Middle East is not the way to achieve the much-needed and much-desired change. Indeed, the experience of the last 5 years has demonstrated beyond any doubt that undermining the institutions of the nation-state creates a political and social vacuum that is quickly filled by primordial institutions, sectarian militias, and outright terrorists, whose ideologies are hostile to the hopes for democracy, modernization, and a revival of civic order. From Syria to Libya to Iraq and Yemen, examples abound. The challenge, therefore, is to achieve change within the nation-state, not on the ruins thereof. the nation-state remains the most viable vehicle for modernization and social change, and in its more progressive versions is the embodiment of civic order and democratic principles and policies. That is the hopes that inspired the calls for change since 2011. Egypt, traditionally the intellectual and political powerhouse of the region, demonstrated through the two waves of its revolution in 2011 and 2013 that an orderly and progressive change which responds to the aspirations of the vast majority of the population while maintaining the integrity of the nation state institutions is a viable choice. Egyptians demanded change, but they rejected the ruin of their state institutions in the process. They believe that they can have a democratic government that is at once representative and responsive to their needs and desires, forward-looking and boldly committed to ambitious reform. The foreign policy of this rejuvenated, reform and revived Egyptian state is guided by principles that are deeply embedded in our millennial history and values, distrustful of conspiracy theories and conflictual worldviews, and strictly committed to the cosmopolitan principles of peace, development, respect for the independence of nations, and non-intervention in their affairs, while believing that regional and international interests are essentially reconcilable and that there are always opportunities for regional and international cooperation to face the challenges of our times. If Egypt could change and democratize its government, revive its regional role, and embark on the most ambitious program of political and economic reform in its modern history without undermining the integrity of the state, then so can our brethren in the Arab world and the region. This tested principle continues to guide our approach to our region. Revived, democratic, and reformed nation-states are the answer to the aspirations of the civic uprisings that swept the region some 5 years ago. Sectarian militias, bloodthirsty warlords, and identity-based cleansing are, by contrast, the product of the civil wars that the democratic aspirations of several countries of our regions have regressed to. Ladies and gentlemen, few would disagree that orderly change based on rejuvenation, reform, and democratization of nation-states would probably be the best way out of today's turbulence in the Middle East. And indeed, this continues to be the guiding principle that governs Egypt's policies towards the region. Take Syria, for example. With 500,000 Syrians killed, millions of refugees and displaced persons, and unprecedented rise of sectarian warlords and terrorist groups, it is difficult to remember that this tragedy started with peaceful and legitimate demands that the Syrian people are perfectly entitled to. However, between the regional and international powers that supported various militias to achieve regime change in Syria and those who sought to reverse the clock at any cost, the Syrian people had to endure one of the bloodiest civil wars of modern times. How do we break the vicious cycle of destruction in Syria? To start with, we need to accept that the attempts to reverse the clock and restore the status quo ante in Syria are as delusional as the reliance on sectarian, militia-led transformation in Syria. By contrast, our vision for the way forward in Syria is based on two pillars. The first is to preserve the national unity and territorial integrity of the Syrian state and to prevent the collapse of its institutions. The second is to support the legitimate aspirations of the Syrian people in rebuilding their own state through an acceptable political solution that represents them all and furnishes an enabling environment for reconstruction efforts. This is why we continue to support the efforts of the United Nations Special Envoy Staffan de Mistura, and we call on him to resume political negotiations immediately and without delay. It is also why we hosted two all-inclusive conferences for the various moderate Syrian opposition groups in Cairo in 2012 and in 2015, which brought together Syrians from across the political spectrum and demonstrated that they can agree on a comprehensive document that included a doable roadmap for the transition from the current plight in Syria. You must have all noticed that these documents were the foundations upon which every subsequent effort, Syrian or international, to put forward a practical political settlement were premised. Ladies and gentlemen, the revival of a reformed national state means that external political engineering is neither desirable nor possible. The international community is not in a position to pass judgment on the suitability of national stakeholders, let alone to decide to exclude any of them on grounds of convenience. The experience in Iraq and the debacle in Syria should have taught us at least that much. The same applies to Libya. Underlying the Sukhayrat agreement was the acknowledgement that any viable settlement should revolve around the three legitimate state institutions, the Presidency Council, the House of Representatives, and the National Army. Naturally, achieving consensus among the three institutions in the wake of violent upheaval is not easy. Problems and contradictions abound, and deadlocks emerge profusely. However, this does not mean that we can opt to take sides between the three legitimate institutions in moments of disagreement, or even worse, decide to alienate one of them in the hope that this might speed up the process of reconciliation. In all frankness, several international and regional players have opted at one point or another to undermine one of these institutions or to replace the National Army with allegedly benign militias, but not Egypt, though. We remain convinced of the futility of political engineering, and we do not think any non-Libyan party is in a position to award or exclude Libyan stakeholders. Thus, our vision for Libya is based on an unwavering commitment to the full implementation of the Sukhayrat Agreement and follows a clear sequential approach. Our duty now is to encourage the Presidency Council to fulfill its duty to present a new, more inclusive and representative government of national accord. Subsequently, we should all shift our attention to ensuring that the House of Representatives meets to endorse the government and undertake its constitutional work in preparation for Libyan elections that would bring about elected Libyan governing bodies that exercise their full authority over a united and territorially intact Libyan national state. Meanwhile, we should devote our efforts to supporting the Libyan National Army's efforts in the fight against the growing terrorist organizations in Libya. I could go on and explore other cases of troubled nation statehood in the region, say in Yemen or in Iraq, but they all follow the same pattern. Troubled nation states faltering and creating a vacuum that is subsequently filled by primordial organizations and sectarian militias. And they can all benefit from the same answer: revived, reformed, and all-inclusive modern nation states based on civic ethics and full citizenship. The quest for reformed and modernized nation statehood is not only the answer to the emerging threats in the Middle East, it is also the answer to the oldest of the conflicts in our region, the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Egypt, as you all know, was the pioneer of peace in the Middle East. Our vision was and still is based on full nation statehood for everyone in the region. We are committed to bringing to a successful end more than 6 decades of this conflict, without which we cannot shift the resources of our region to more productive channels. To do so, the Palestinians cannot and should not be denied the right to an independent nation state. The alternative to a two-state solution is open-ended turmoil, even if in the short term things look deceptively quiet and manageable. Desperation and lack of any light at the end of what is indeed a very long tunnel could only be detrimental to any hopes of stability and prosperity in the region. The parameters of a two-state solution and the structure thereof are quite self-evident. What remains is a return to the negotiations in good faith. I would like here to remind you that President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has offered publicly to support any forthcoming negotiations and to provide, if needed, post-agreement security guarantees. Ladies and gentlemen, the rapid and large-scale developments that I have talked about in more than one area of our region obviously do not occur in a bubble. Given the strategic importance of the Middle East, it is only natural that several regional and international powers may want to be involved in seeking to influence the course of developments in our region, benignly and otherwise. Egypt appreciates that the stakes in the Middle East are of interest to several international players, and whilst we insist on national ownership of all solutions to the Arab world's problems and on reformed nation statehood as the key response to the challenges of our time, Egypt remains, as always, ready to cooperate with all our partners to bring satisfactory conclusions to the crisis that spread in our region. In so doing, we cannot accept any attempt by any regional or international actor to use sub-state entities and sectarian militias to further their interests. Acceptance of the necessity of change from within, one that preserves the territorial and institutional integrity and social cohesion of nation states, is a core criterion of deciding whether or not we can cooperate with any regional or international stakeholders in this regard. Ladies and gentlemen, I am back today in Washington at a moment full of promises and challenges. I come from a country that is moving quickly to restore its leading role in a rapidly changing region. The Egyptian people have demonstrated their ability to take charge of their future through 2 revolutions in the span of 3 years. The first to initiate change, and the second to preserve the nature of Egypt's unique moral and social foundation. We recognize that we face monumental changes and inherent problems, but the current determination to deal with these challenges is unshakable. Egypt has changed in many ways, most important of which is the confidence of Egyptians in their leadership, and the faith of the leadership in the resilience and fortitude of the people. This confidence and this faith allows us to embark on a new chapter in our history, to deal with our problems head on, and to take difficult decisions and rise to the occasion to create a better future for our children and grandchildren. We recognize our shortcomings and the necessity to achieve greater progress in the areas of political, economic, and social reform, while dealing with the internal challenges associated with societal evolution, educational and economic deficiencies, as well as regional and global turbulences and threats. Egypt has always been and will continue to be the beacon of modernity in the Middle East. This will be reinforced now by implementing policies based on a moral code of conduct and values derived from our history and heritage. Ladies and gentlemen, we are on the eve of a new U.S. administration that has stated its commitment to working with its regional partners to fight terrorism and restore stability to the Middle East. The question of how our 2 great countries can cooperate to address the regional challenges that I have outlined is therefore in order. I believe that we share with the United States and with the new administration a firm belief in the importance of restoring stability and the territorial integrity of the region's nation states through supporting nationally owned processes of reconciliation and revival of these states. How else can we face the growing threat of terrorism? And how can we bring about a peaceful conclusion to the multitude of crises in our region? The interests of our 2 countries are in clear convergence. In Syria, we can work together for a peaceful settlement according to the Vienna process and based on the Geneva Declarations. In Libya, we can both work to support the full implementation of the Sukhairat Agreement and an all-inclusive government of national accord. We both share the same unrelenting commitment to the eradication of sectarianism and terrorism. We both agree on the unsustainability of the current stagnation between Israel and the Palestinians and the need to relaunch the efforts to achieve the 2-state solution. I could go on, but I trust that you get the idea. The Middle East is in turmoil. Egypt is keen on cooperating with the new U.S. administration to address the challenges thereof. I have sought to outline our vision on how to address these challenges, and I trust you will agree with me that this vision converges with the stated goals of the new U.S. administration in the Middle East, thereby furnishing all the necessary conditions for a revival of our much-needed strategic partnership. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister Shukri, for honoring us with a very serious speech, keynote speech, for which we're very grateful. The Minister has kindly agreed to a conversation in which I'll have a chance to follow up with some of his points that he made. I was quite struck by what you appeared to be saying about a common agenda with the United States, and the implication was with the Trump administration. You spoke about restoring stability. Interestingly, President-elect Trump yesterday spoke about his focus being on promoting stability in terms of his foreign policy. Do you feel that the kinds of principles that you laid out about eradicating sectarianism, restoring stability, and promoting peace are in fact the common purposes between the Trump administration in formation and the government of Egypt?
Well, we extract that there is a great deal of convergence by the statements that have been made by President-elect Trump and some of his advisors in terms of the meetings we have had with President-elect Trump during the campaign, that there is a clear vision in this regard, a vision that corresponds to our objectives. Our objectives is to regain the stability of the region and to create from Egypt a point of expanse of what we have achieved in other parts of the region. I think this is a mutual interest that we share with the administration, and it shouldn't be in any way conceived that the call for stability is a call for the maintenance of the status quo, but it is a call for a organized change and progression of societal demands of the population of the region, which have clearly indicated the desire to forge ahead in a new fashion of inclusivity, of democratization, respect of human rights, and a more inclusive society free from the scourge of terrorist and sectarian pressures.
When you talk about that, and you spoke, I think, quite eloquently in the beginning about the need for orderly change and the difference between the kind of radical change that the region has experienced through revolutions, particularly in Egypt, and versus the status quo and no change at all. And you rejected both those models and spoke about this model of orderly change. Again, I assume that the implication in that is that Egypt is going to be this model of orderly change. What does that mean actually in terms of reform, political reform, economic reform within Egypt?
Well, it's certainly, I think, open to the necessary involvement of all segments of society to phrase and to achieve those common values of democratization, of economic reform and social reform that are necessary for any society to develop adequately. These are values of humanity, values that I think are well embedded in our common heritage. And I don't think they are any longer matters of contention or debate, but they are to be implemented within the ability of societies to absorb and taking into account the various characteristics. Certainly, what has happened in the United States, and having had the benefit of living in this country for a variety of years over the last 40 to 50 years, what the United States today is very much different than what it was 50 years ago in terms of its development, in terms of the degree of the maturity of its systems, and even its social and moral fabric. So I think this is a necessary evolutionary process, one that corresponds to the aspirations of the people of the Middle East that were demonstrated in 2011 and that continue to be the motivator of reform. It is a response from governments who are keenly aware of the ability of the people to take matters into their own hands, institute change, and also it is important that though necessarily always the demands for change can be vibrant and can be overreaching, but the threat has been what has resulted in places like Syria and Libya in a dysfunctionality, in creating vacuums, in anarchy, and the potential of a civil conflict that can be very detrimental. When we see that more than half of the Syrian population, a population that has been renowned for its entrepreneurial abilities, for its educational standards, and now the status of destruction and what the people have had to endure is I think an example of what we should avoid.
When it comes to Syria, you outlined an approach which I think, if I'm interpreting it correctly, really leaves the issue of political transition to later. That from your point of view, the first thing is to preserve the institutions and try to resolve the conflict and then deal with the political transition. Is that fair?
Not really. It's not a sequential issue. It's an issue I think that has to be addressed all at once. But from the perspective of a political process, because we cannot continue in advocating the same process that we have witnessed over the last 5 years and expect different results. If this status of conflict and destruction continues, it's apparent that none of the proponents is able or capable of achieving any definite success. And thereby we should change course. And to change course, the international community, the United Nations Security Council, the UN envoy must initiate a political process, must include all of the participants, and must reach an agreement that is inclusive of all of the political entities in Syria. We take it for granted that such a process will necessarily change the nature and the dynamics of Syrian governance. And this can only be expected in terms of the consequences that have occurred out of these last 5 years. It would be ludicrous to think that those who have suffered will opt for the status quo in any fashion.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. It's hard for me to imagine, I don't know whether you would agree with this, that the Syrian people could accept President Assad as their leader, given the incredible death and destruction that he has rained on his own people.
I would think that this process should be all-inclusive, should take into account the interests of all participants, all segments of Syrian society, and it's up to the Syrians to decide their future and the manner in which they are governed.
That's why I called you in my introduction the model diplomat. You talked about the unacceptability of countries that are supporting, I think you used the term sub-state entities, the use of sub-state entities to advance their interests. And again, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but Iran uses sub-state entities to advance its ambitions in the region. And you know, that is a concern of many of your fellow Arab leaders in this regard. But my sense is that Egypt has a bit of a more nuanced approach to Iran. Could you just elaborate a little bit on how you see Iran's role in the region?
Well, as I indicated, I think the Arab world and Egypt as a contributor and custodian of Arab national security is always advocating that this is a responsibility of the Arab countries, and that we do not accept interference or intervention from without the regional context from any state. This is a matter of sovereignty and a matter of the cohesion of the Arab entity. And though we base our policy on principles of non-intervention, of respect and sovereignty, we recognize that there are interests, and we must all accommodate national interests, but not at the expense of what might be deemed as influence or interference. And we have a very clear vision, and there must be consequences to any infringement on Arab national security, and that is something that the Arab world in its solidarity will always rise to the occasion to defend.
One of the things that has always struck me about Egypt, because Egypt is the largest, most consequential Arab state, and it has a long history, civilization, ancient civilization, and a cohesion as a state. That you look at the region and you look at the other regional powers there. So we have Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Israel, Turkey. When you look at the broader strategic picture within the region, how do you see those other players? How do they fit into your broad strategy?
Well, as I said, I think there's a great deal of cohesion within the regional Arab states and their commonality of purpose. But then we recognize, of course, the presence of states outside of the Arab domain. And it has always been our position that relations should be based on principles of mutual interests and benefit, and that should not overreach into positions of influence or intervention to manipulate the proceedings or to manipulate conditions within a state. And these are well-founded principles in the UN Charter and in international law, and ones that I think we should continue to advocate and to build the international world order upon. These are core principles, and I think the more we are clear on the definition and the limitations that are created, the better benefit I think all will extract.
Finally, I wanted to ask you about what you'd said about the peace process, and there's clearly a strengthening of the relationship between Egypt and Israel that's been quite noticeable under President Sisi, and a greater Egyptian leadership role of late than we've seen over the last 5-6 years. But what I heard you say this evening sounded more like you would be supporting perhaps an American-led process rather than taking your own initiative to try to resolve this. On the other hand, Egypt has been quite active on the Palestinian front in terms of seeking a succession there. So can you just give us a little more granularity in terms of how you see Egypt's role and what you think can actually be done in these circumstances?
Well, Egypt is committed, and it's part of its foreign policy objectives to consolidate the peace treaty with Israel and to continue to regard the peace treaty as a fundamental component of stabilizing the region. And it has, I think, served for that purpose and continues to be the guiding example for wider peace in the region and the end of conflict. But it's not only that we have supported the initiatives of others. I think most recently, President Sisi, I think, indicated very directly his vision for the end of the conflict and his readiness to be an active participant in bringing together the two main proponents, the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority, in whatever form of renewed negotiations that they would deem appropriate and they would be willing to engage in. And it remains stated publicly that this is how we view the way forward to the end of the conflict. But there are many other initiatives. There is the U.S. administration, the current administration's efforts led by Secretary Kerry had been valiant in his determination. There's the French initiative. There's the constant referral of this issue to the United Nations Security Council, to which we are currently a member. So we will continue to promote and advocate on the basis of the negotiations between the two sides, that this has to be on the basis of the conviction of the two sides to end the conflict, to achieve the two-state solution as the viable way forward that can be embraced by not only the two peoples, but can be embraced by the region, by the international community. And we will continue to provide whatever we can to support that process within the ability of both sides to recognize that this is a historic moment and that it is in their best interest, in the interest of the region, and in the interest of international peace and security that we finally end the conflict.
As you know, I had a little bit of involvement in the last go-round of direct negotiations. One of the things that was highly problematic there was the fact that we had no agreed terms of reference. Resolution 242 or 338 don't really apply to the Israeli-Palestinian dimensions of the Arab-Israeli conflict.
But we have Oslo. We have Oslo.
We have indeed Oslo, but it doesn't have terms of reference for a final status negotiation. That was, as you know, an interim process. So I'm wondering, you know, there's been a lot of talk of late that it would be useful to introduce via the Security Council a kind of updated Resolution 242, which would have parameters or principles that would lay the terms of reference for a renewed negotiation. Is that something that Egypt would find useful?
Well, I think the degree of its usefulness is the degree that the main two sides would embrace and implement such a proposal. Again, I think we have a multitude of resolutions that have set the tone and addressed many of the dimensions of the conflict, but have not had the necessary impact to forge ahead in resolving the conflict. But any proposal or initiative or direction, whether in the Security Council or elsewhere, I think it's necessary that both sides are fully committed to and recognize the value of such a process to their interests.
Mr. Shukri, you've been very generous with your time and with your insights, and we're all very grateful to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For addressing the Saban Forum.
Thank you.